The tragic death of Austin Metcalf has set off a nationwide firestorm, a debate of many sorts surrounding race and surrounding culture and surrounding, really, the facts of the event itself. And this debate is causing respective factions on both sides, the extreme respective factions on both sides, to try to make apologism for the indefensible, to defend the indefensible, and also to try to draw conclusions that, in my opinion, this situation does not warrant. So in this video, my friends, we're going to cover this tragedy. I'm going to go over the facts, but then I'm going to explore the various reactions to it, and I'm going to give my take on what we should be looking at as thinking people and as good, moral, and prudent people, what we should be looking at when it comes to this kind of issue in similar instances of youth violence. But before we explore this, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I'm Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary from a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure our channel is successful. Thank you guys so much for being here. Now, please enjoy the video. So, in Frisco, Texas, at a track meet, two high school kids, Austin Metcalf and Carmela Anthony, unfortunately had an encounter that led to the death of one of them. This is the timeline of that encounter. So Carmela Anthony was in a tent that did not belong to his particular track team. He was in the wrong tent. Austin Metcalf, the victim, went up to him and asked him to leave. This is according to the police report. Carmela Anthony immediately puts his hands into his bag, which contained a knife, and he said, "If you touch me, see what happens." Austin Metcalf, not really taking him seriously, again, according to the police report, and his friends not taking him seriously, not believing he would actually have any kind of weapon, walks up to him and tries to move him gently, according to the police report, from the spot. At that point, Anthony Carmelo takes the knife, stabs it in Metcalf's heart, runs away, tells a local police officer that eventually encounters him that it's not alleged that he stabbed anyone, that he actually did stab him, so he admits to the crime. And Austin Metcalf dies in his brother's arms. This is an absolutely tragic story of horrendous proportions. No one should have to lose a son like this. No one should have to lose a brother, a friend, a track team member like this. It is just absolutely stunning, and it's an absolute tragedy as well. But what's just as great of a tragedy as this is how so many different people are taking these set of facts that I just explained to you and using them and siphoning them into fodder for their own worldviews. Indeed, my friends, folks on both the far extreme left, who have been race-obsessed and identity-obsessed for a very long time, and this goes all the way back, as I mentioned before, to the emergence of the new left over the old left in the early 20th century. I have other videos on that if you wish to see that kind of genealogy there. But also the identity-based and race-obsessed right, which has also been using this as a means of driving a wedge within American society. So on the identity-obsessed left, there have been numerous figures, such as Tariq Nasheed and others, trying to defend Anthony Carmelo by saying that he was simply defending himself, which is also the position, by the way, of the Carmelo family, who have a Give, Send, Go page that has generated over $250,000 so far in his legal defense fund. But they also are claiming that Austin Metcalf was acting as a Jim Crow instigator by trying to get Anthony Carmelo to move to a different spot. Now, trying to liken this to Jim Crow is not only a massive logical leap, which is saying the very least, it's also a fallacy by historical analogy. It is an attempt to liken two things that are similar to be the same, right? Similarity does not confer sameness. And anyone that says otherwise, who claims to be an analyst of any kind, should not be listened to any more than Stevie Wonder should be listened to when it comes to driving lessons. Different story, different day. So that's a lot of what's going on the far left, and they're trying to make this into some broader racial justice issue. On the far right, they are trying to use this as a means of driving Black Americans from the rightward coalitions, from the more conservative coalitions. They're trying to use this to talk about segregation, bringing back segregation, and they're also trying to use this to talk about how they believe that Black youth cannot safely interact with Asian or white youth by ginning up an old article from a now fired National Review author called John Derbyshire, who's basically talked about in that article that all white and Asian parents should give their kids the talk about Black people and how to avoid Black people. And you have other people on the right as well saying that there should never have been Blacks let into conservative circles because this prevents us from actually talking about the problem of Black violence, what so have you. So on the far left, you have this identity-based apologism, this defense of the indefensible on the basis of identity. And on the far right, you have this call for segregation and this call for exclusion of black people and this call for, as well, just blatant collective guilt and racial sentiment. This concerns me both as a citizen and as a philosopher. And as a citizen, I understand that any commonwealth, any society, the key to solving issues is by beginning from the premise of goodwill. Goodwill is the sort of social lubricant that allows us to not just see the good in other people, but to will the good into their lives and then try to pursue that. Now, it doesn't always work out. And in cases where it does not always work out, we are free to associate with whom we wish or whom we wish not to. And that's a very different situation. But as the default, as a citizen in a country, goodwill must be the starting premise. When you lack goodwill, you get antagonism. And when you get antagonism, you no longer have a society if the antagonism is universalized, as Kant would say, in its broadest extent. You instead have a bunch of warring tribes clashing against each other that are operating under an imitation of a society. And in some cases, it seems like we've had that for a very long time, but we really haven't. But unfortunately, this could be the outcome of an attempt to reckon with this issue in this very odd and this very narrow way. As a philosopher, it worries me because people are allowing their confirmation biases and their totalizing worldviews to dominate their ability to objectively consider a set of facts about a tragic situation. In some senses, my friends, Austin Metcalf and Anthony Carmelo are not two individuals who may have been dictated and moved by particular variables that had nothing to do with either race or identity or any kind of broader social cause, but more so has to do with some kind of maybe hidden desires within them, or maybe environmental symptoms that were happening within that particular track field. No, they're not that. They can't possibly be that. They're not measurable individuals. They are avatars for these broad, abstract social causes that we then therefore must use this unfortunate situation to further. So there's also a problem here, my friends, of speculation. Speculation being the attempt of seeing things that happen within the society, not through an observable and calculable lens, but through a lens that encourages abstract thinking and also encourages the imagination to take over and supplant reason. This is a tragedy of massive philosophical importance, my friends. So we have to really ask ourselves the question, why in the world is this becoming a debate about race? Why in the world, out of every single other factor, so much I want to explore in a second, that could be talked about in relation to this tragedy, why in the world is this a debate about race? My friends, every moral person, every rational person should be concerned about one thing, and that one thing is stopping and fighting evil. And the moment, my friends, that we are not concerned about addressing acts of evil as acts of evil, and instead addressing acts of evil as acts born of some kind of immutable characteristic, or rather acts born of some kind of social status, is the moment we demote human behavior from being that of a willful action that therefore produces the circumstances for moral responsibility to being that of some deterministic, predetermined action by which no one can be held responsible for their actions whatsoever. The moment you allow some factor, some immeasurable factor, whether it be race, whether it be status, whether it be anything beyond the will of the individual, which is free and is capable of acting towards a particular conclusion, bad or good, the moment you allow those other factors to supplant that is the moment you get rid of not just personal responsibility, which is on one level simply you taking responsibility for your own actions, but moral responsibility, which is a much greater version of personal responsibility, which simply says, you're not just responsible for your own actions. You're responsible for how your actions accord with right reason. You're responsible for how your actions accord with first principles. You're responsible for how your actions accord with virtue. You're responsible for how your actions accord with X, Y, Z. And this, my friends, is the issue here. This is not a race issue. This is a moral issue. This is not just a moral issue. This is an issue of fidelity. This is not just an issue of fidelity. This is an issue of perception. There are 3 stages, my friends. This is going to get a little bit deep, so if that's not your thing, click off if you want to, but I encourage you to stay tuned because we need to really understand what's going on here if I'm going to make any sense to speak to these insanities going on. There are 3 levels of moral engagement. There's understanding, There's perception, then there's action. In order to have the right kind of moral perceptions, you must understand what morality is, what ethics are, and how to act within the parameters laid forth by a robust account of both of those things within society. That understanding them influences your perception. This is one of the reasons why if you go out to a tribe in the Amazon, or you go out to the North Central Nepalese people off the coast of India, who have no moral education, they will kill you just for being there because they have a primitive mind. They're primitive minded, so to speak. They are not educated in the ways of civilized society. So we must all educate ourselves in the ways of civilized society in a way that's going to bind our sort of primal activities as a human being. So once your perception is all right, then your behavior now has a basis within perception to actually be acted out, because a lot of us will act on the basis of our perception for good or for ill. This is simply how things work. And so, if we evaluate the circumstances of this case, it becomes very obvious that Anthony Carmelo had no robust moral education, or if he did, his perceptions did not afford it the force it should have had over his actions. The first thing he does, according to the police report, is threaten to hurt somebody who is rightfully asserting that he should not be in a place where he ought not to be. That's the first thing he does. He does not think to himself, well, I am invading a space that I shouldn't be invading, and therefore I should then remove myself. No, he thinks, oh, if you try to remove me, even if it's rightful, you try to evict me from some place I have no right to be, it's going to be your life. This demonstrates an extreme lack of moral education. This demonstrates an extreme lack of goodwill, and most importantly, this demonstrates a complete lack of fidelity. And that's my first thing here. This is not a race issue. This issue, in my opinion, if it's going to be derivative of any broader thing, and by the way, I'm not convinced that you have to assume that particular events that happen on a particular area are a result of some broader phenomenon. This is the fallacy that idealism has wrought upon all of us as Americans. Idealism, which is a European import, comes straight from Germany, comes straight from France, or comes straight from those sort of Enlightenment schools, those sort of anti-Enlightenment schools rather, because it's really an anti-Enlightenment idea, comes straight from the sort of postmodern schools. And idealism convinces all of us that we can perceive of the world as our imagination constructs it, not as the world actually is. Some folks think this is just denying reality. It's a little bit more than that. It's remaking reality in your own image according to a particular worldview that is false. So the moment you perceive the world in a way that it's not actually is, and you reframe it, you can then therefore reframe our tools of engagement with the world. That means you can throw out all reason, all logic. You can throw out all consideration, all fidelity towards truth, because it's no longer about the truth of what's going on in the world. It's the truth of upholding your ideology. This is what's called a totalizing belief system. So we're having a significant fidelity crisis here. And if we're going to view anything in a broader sense, we have to look at that as well. But I'm also open to the possibility that maybe this is just an unfortunate case of passion, impulse, and ignorance on the case of Anthony Carmelo, overtaking his behavior, causing him to commit an egregious wrong, one which he must be duly punished for. I'm not convinced that everything has to be some grandiose issue tied to some grand idealistic construct. And this form of thinking has to be eradicated from the American psyche. Or what's going to happen is very simple. It's actually very disgusting what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that we're not going to be able to conceptualize events that occur due to circumstances that are not immediately evident, and events that occur due to things that are evident to us, but are a product of our confirmation bias. And therefore, whenever this kind of stuff happens, we're going to be trapped in a loop, perpetual loop, of infinite regression in our ability to deal with them. But the people who want clicks online, to the abstract mind, to the speculative minds, none of this matters, of course, right? None of this matters. It's just all, we have to just sensationalize everything. You have to just take everything out of context. Anyway, if we're going to assign a general cause, it ought to be a few things. Number one, the fidelity crisis. Fidelity, trust, is the glue of society. It is one thing to have a society where respect is held to be very important. But you have to have some level of credibility in terms of that respect. And this is where fidelity comes in. We've been having a fidelity crisis in the West for a very long time. There are people who are abandoning their homes and their towns and whatever just to get a quick buck. There are people that are abandoning their promises with wanton disregard just because they wish to pursue their own interest over the promises they had previously established. There are people who are going and desecrating the graves of the dead, the people that already should be resting and should have a peaceful non-existence, so to speak. They can't even rest because there are folks that have no respect for life, and they are willing to just completely and utterly violate those areas. There are just so many different things happening that is a flagrant disregard for fidelity. There are people who are chasing social media clicks and sensationalism, rather, over attempting to build authentic relationships with people. There are people that are willing to backstab others just to get a little bit of fame and a little bit of currency in this digital world, because in the digital world, dishonesty, unfortunately, pays. The fidelity crisis, a society without fidelity, is not just a bad society, because it's one thing to have a society that is bad but functional. But it is also a society that cannot possibly function. Distrust breeds aggression and breeds, frankly, antagonism. And antagonism breeds the dissolution of bonds, and the dissolution of bonds breeds all kinds of unfortunate ills. So, fidelity is an important issue here. There was no fidelity on Anthony Carmelo's part towards the life, or even towards the basic issue of respecting the place he was in. There was no fidelity towards place, which is also a very big problem in our society today as well. Place is just seen as entirely coincidental and entirely discarded for other kinds of aims. But as I also mentioned, there's a crisis of moral education. There was no exercise of principles when it comes to this incident. There was just a use of passion and this sort of conceited, wholly self-absorbed, I should probably say, notion that Anthony Carmelo's ability to feel as if he is comfortable and as if he is right overrides any possibility of him being wrong. But there's also something else that is very important. There is a desensitization and also a lionization of violence within youth culture. Whether it be, for example, in some more popular examples, a very popular singer Sabrina Carpenter had a music video that came out where the whole music video is basically just a gore fest where she and another girl are just trying to kill each other. That's one thing. You have, for example, in popular music amongst Gen Z, a lot of rap music, a lot of talks of antagonism and aggression and enmity, a lot of talks of having random sex with people and shooting people and taking their women or doing other kinds of egregious things, so on and so forth. Violence is not something that is seen as a kind of moral horror or something to be avoided. It is rather either something to be treated as coy, something that should be treated as just an everyday fact of life, or something to be lionized as a kind of strength. Lionized is a kind of sign of strength. That is something that is very prominent right now. And when you lionize a clearly bad action, a clearly antisocial and a clearly anti-moral action as a sign of strength, even if there is a understanding that's not actually a good thing in reality, there are people who will internalize that and whose behavior may be implicitly guided by that. We have to understand that willful action can always be implicitly guided. It's not always a clean shot between willful action and willful intent. Sometimes there is no clean break there. These are three very important issues that deserve a lot of conversation, that go beyond the Anthony Carmelo situation, that go beyond the Austin Metcalf situation, and instead speak to deep truths that we need to reckon with as people within Western civilization. But instead of focusing on these issues, this angle, so many people want to focus on race. So many people want to focus on these kind of low-quality conversations. So many people want to make this an issue about race as opposed to being an issue about the worst parts of our humanity creeping out due to bad cultural influences, the worst parts of our humanity creeping out due to lack of moral education, the worst parts of our humanity creeping out because of lack of understanding of fidelity, the worst parts of our humanity creeping out because of a total placement of self over anything else, and unbounded by any kind of principles. That is what this should be about. I won't deny that there is an importance to talk about the issue of anti-white racism. There absolutely is. It's been a cultural phenomenon that has been happening in our country for a very long time. And there are many people who have addressed that, who should keep addressing that problem, because it's going to continue to be a problem unless it is countered as forcibly as racism towards any other group should be countered. However, to assume that every incident involving a black person and a white person, or a black person and anyone else, or any race involving, or a white person involving a black person, is a case of racism on either side, is once again to collapse complex issues to pre-assumed biases, and then most importantly to create one of the most egregious things, to assume that in your infinite wisdom you know everything without even a full consideration of the facts. Before the facts even fully came out, people were already jumping towards this conclusion. They were already so professed in their wisdom, right? What's that one line from scripture? Thinking themselves wise, they became fools. That is precisely what we're having. We have a culture of fools that believe themselves to be enlightened. And so another thing is very important as well. As I mentioned, if we're going to be against speculation and we're going to go towards observation, then we also have to understand that in terms of general truths, it is not young black men stabbing or killing young white men at record rates. It is in fact young black men stabbing and killing or shooting most times young black men at record rates. And I really wished that phenomenon got as much attention as this one got. And I really wished those extreme camps on both the far identitarian left and the far identitarian right will look at that situation and ask themselves what the question is beyond their preconceived notions and actually dig deep into it and come together to try to find some kind of solution. But when your entire worldview revolves around antagonism and causing problems, when your entire worldview revolves around a narrow social view that does not conceive man outside of society but conceives man as simply a product of society, when your narrow worldview revolves around these kinds of things, you're not incentivized to find anything except that which justifies your propositions. And that's the problem here, my friends. I am exhausted. I'm tired. I'm upset. I'm bothered. I'm disturbed to great lengths because I understand the potential that we still have as a country to achieve enlightenment on these very important areas. And I understand that the problems facing us are not the problems that are popularly talked about like race or whatever, but they are instead problems that transcend identity and go towards the core of the human experience. And I also understand that no conversation about society or morality or any kind of social progress is complete without considering the human experience and human nature. And I also understand that many people in this debate outright reject the complexity of human nature and have a caricature of human nature that they seek to forcibly impose upon particular situations to justify their wretched worldviews. My friends, we do not achieve enlightenment this way. We do not achieve a better country this way. And we sure as hell are not going to achieve justice for anyone this way. Austin Metcalf should still be alive. But what should also be alive is our goodwill, is our good sense, our desire to improve ourselves morally, our desire to deal with difficult situations with a sobriety of mind and a kind of prudence, which are both virtues. And those things, unfortunately, are in the grave. And so long as they remain in the grave in our current cultural conversation, this situation will not be the end of this kind of stuff. It will simply be a cycle that continues to play out time and time again until it leads to the whittling down of whatever goodwill is left in society. And that terrifies me. But I believe that there are enough people in this world, enough reasonable people, to ensure that reality does not come to pass. If I have anything to do with it, I will continue to speak out against it, and I will continue to forcibly advocate for goodness, for benevolence, and for goodwill amongst people. My friend, thank you guys so much. Like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever again to ensure that we get our message out there. My friend, study history, study philosophy. Remember, we're convicted, and please stay pensive.